most common question that I get asked is, how are you going to pay for your manifesto? Now, on one level, this is really encouraging because what it shows me is that the people out there are actually thinking in detail about what Reform UK are proposing, but they're a lot smarter than the media gives them credit for. Um, Quite often I get frustrated at the way the media are always wanting the government to do more and therefore spend more and therefore tax more. And actually, what a lot of people want in Britain today is less government, less control over their lives, and more freedom. And that's really goes to the heart of what Reform UK stand for. So, yes, there is a lot of tax cutting in our manifesto. But it's not just tax cutting, there's some spending promises as well, particularly on health. And so, rightly, people are questioning where you're going to get the money for this. So, I wanted to do a bit of a longer video than I normally do, just to kind of outline some of the headlines on where we're going to get the money to deliver the promises that we have in the manifesto. So, let's start with the biggest, which is net zero. The elephant in the room is the climate change agenda has taken over both Conservative and Labour parties. These people are, I like to call them watermelons. They're green on the outside and red on the inside. Everything that they do, doesn't matter what they propose, it demands more control from the government, more taxation, more spending from the government, and really they're communists dressed up as environmentalists, and that's why I call them watermelons. Net zero is really, it's unobtainable. If you actually look into the net zero plan, it goes far, far beyond zero carbon emissions for electricity generation, which is what most people think about. Most people think about wind farms, solar farms, nuclear, hydro, but to get to net zero across the entire economy means ending the use of plastics, it means ending the use of concrete, it means ending the use of bricks, it means the end of steel manufacturing, it means the end of so many things that we have come to enjoy as part of our modern way of life. It means raising the price of cars and laptops and mobile phones to such an extent that only the very wealthy can afford those luxuries. That's what net zero would actually mean in practical terms. In terms of air travel, it would be Heathrow, Glasgow and Belfast. Now, this is not me making this up. This is all part of the government's net zero plan, which I'm going to put on my website for people to see. But the bit I'm going to focus on today is forget all the fanciful stuff about ending concrete and plastics. The immediate concern is the government's plans to get to zero carbon in electricity generation. Now, by a happy coincidence, the best way for us to achieve self-sufficiency in energy is to go for low carbon options like nuclear, and gas is actually a low carbon option as well. Natural gas is 30% has 30% less CO2 emissions than oil, and 50% less CO2 emissions than coal. So it is actually quite clean, and we're blessed with 50 years of natural gas onshore in this country, which Rishi Sunak has banned. He's banned the use of shale gas in the UK, and instead we're shipping liquefied natural gas from the USA and Qatar, which, according to the BBC's analysis, has 10 times the CO2 of domestic natural gas. And that's because of the process involved in freezing that gas to turn it into liquid and shipping it across the ocean and then heating it up to regasify it so that it can be put into our pipes. So LNG, liquefied natural gas, has got far more CO2 than using shale gas at home. Now, what's the reason that the government is doing this? What's the reason the government are taxing North Sea oil and gas out of existence? It's so that they can look good in terms of their green credentials. This is green accounting, where you ship off your CO2 emissions to other countries to make it look like you've got great green credentials. Meanwhile, you're losing all of your strategic ability to manufacture to generate your own electricity needs, all so that you can kind of look good for the newspapers and look good at the latest COP conference, whenever it is. None of this makes any sense. Of course, it's not going to benefit the planet for us to get shale gas from America instead of getting shale gas from the UK. The CO2 emissions will be, well, I was going to say they'd be the same, but actually they'd be worse because we're shipping that gas across in liquefied form. So the cost of this is absolutely huge. The most immediate thing that the government is doing with wind farms and solar farms is the extra that's an investment that's needed in the national grid to actually connect those wind farms with urban centres. Because, for example, if you take the largest wind farm in the world, which is currently being constructed off the coast of Norfolk by a Danish company called Ørsted, that the power that will come from that is too large for a city the size of Norwich, because the power is so variable. Norwich can't cope when the wind stops and there's no power for Norwich. Where would it get its electricity from? So that power has to be sent to a larger urban centre like London. Now the cost of the Norwich to Tilbury line alone is £7.5 billion. That is an enormous sum of money just to upgrade the line, just to connect wind farms to London. This is happening nationally. It's happening all the way across the UK, and the total cost is £58 billion. Obviously, that's the current estimate. That'll probably go up, as these things usually do. That's the immediate money that the government has budgeted for to roll out connecting wind farms. Now, we could avoid all of that simply by having nuclear power putting the supply where the demand is. Okay. Now I've got no objection to wind and solar when supply is located where demand is. For example, France have done something really smart, which is they've mandated every car park have solar panels on top. The reason for that is obviously if you've got electric cars in the car park charging, you've got the supply where the demand is, and so you don't have that extra cabling cost of connecting the country from wind farm here to city there, and so that saves an absolute fortune. Second of all, it's not part of the kind of strategic power of the grid. It's just a nice to have top up, and so solar panels in your house makes sense, absolutely. A wind turbine for your factory or your farm, absolutely brilliant if you can afford one and it's supplying your electricity needs and it's topping up what you take from the grid, and it gives you a little bit of decentralization and self-sufficiency, then all in favour of that. But as a strategy for the government, for the national grid, for me, it's just a massive waste of money when we should be investing in SMR. Now, what is SMR? SMR is small modular reactors. This is tried and tested technology that's been in our submarines for over 50 years. It's currently being developed by Rolls-Royce, the most famous British company in the world. In Derbyshire, they're developing small modular reactors, which is where they essentially use the manufacturing of parts to lower the cost of nuclear reactors. So these nuclear reactors per gigawatt hour are 5 times cheaper than your standard nuclear power plant like Hinkley Point C or Sizewell B or C. So it's hugely more efficient in terms of cost benefit. It's also zero carbon. If that's important to you, then nuclear is the only way to get to low carbon reliable electricity generation. France have done it. They built 56 reactors between 1975 and 1990. Sweden's done it. Norway's done it largely through hydro. They've got very low carbon electricity, but they're blessed with their fjords, where their fjords tend to have on average 2 inlets, and that makes it much more cost effective for them to dam the fjord and use it for hydroelectricity. most of our locks are in Scotland, where they tend to have 5 or 6 inlets, and so the cost benefit of hydroelectricity doesn't really work in Scotland anywhere near as it does as it does in Norway. So really, your option is nuclear. Now, one of the questions people ask me is, why is wind so expensive? Because the wind is free and the sunshine's free, so why is solar so expensive? The reason it's so expensive is because it's so unreliable that the national grid ends up paying for gas to run alongside it. So we're paying for that electricity generation twice, because as soon as the wind stops, you have to then be able to ramp up gas immediately, and you have to pay for that gas power station to be idling, ready for when the wind stops to ramp up and replace it. So that's the main reason. The second reason, obviously, I've already touched on, which is the cabling. And the third reason is that these wind farms and solar farms do require a lot of rare earth minerals, particularly the solar. The wind farms require a lot of steel. They require a lot of land in terms of the land use that's required for electricity generation. And so the cost is all up front, where the cost of a gas power station is largely in the gas that you buy and use to generate electricity, so it's spread over a longer period, and any business person will tell you that's much easier to manage from a cash flow point of view. With a wind farm, it's all up front, because as we know, the wind is free, but all the cabling and all the steel and all the land that they have to buy or rent to use, most of that's up front unless they're renting the land. So that's why wind farms are largely going bust. A lot of the wind farms that were proposed in New Jersey in America have been cancelled because of the whales that were dying, and the large wind farms that were proposed in Denmark, some of those have been cancelled, and that's why Ørsted is now fully focused on this new one off the coast of Norfolk. So cancelling net zero is going to save tens of billions of pounds immediately on the extra cabling that's required, by shifting our strategy towards shale gas and nuclear away from wind and solar.